Welcome to Win Wednesdays, an initiative of Women in Industry. Before we begin, a few points of note. This session will be recorded and we will be posting it at www.acceleratingwin.org. Typically, it takes a day or two before we have them posted, so it should be up shortly. Also, please use the Q&A function to post any comments or questions that you have or any interaction with our panelists today. The Women in Industry program is an initiative of Point Park's Roland School of Business. It's really about educating and empowering and accelerating the success of women identified students and professionals. We seek to engage leaders, affect conversations, and encourage allyship through elevating experiences. We do have a few different initiatives, including the Win Wednesdays virtual speaker series. We also have, coming up in March, we'll have an Accelerating Women in Industry workshop. We do have, when conditions allow, a campus speaker series. And we certainly welcome you to support our efforts to educate and empower women-identified students and professionals through contributing to our program, and you can visit our website for more information on that. I'm Doreen Saletti. I am an associate professor of marketing and sales in the Roland School of Business, and I'm fortunate to work with Sandy Mervosh, who is the program director for our Human Resources program and has also been instrumental behind our Women in Industry program and our Win Wednesdays. So I'll turn it over to Sandy.
Thank you, Doreen, and thank you, Christy, for joining us today. So I would just like to tell you a little bit about Christy before I turn this over to her. Christy is a certified life coach who works with clients to stress less and live their life with more clarity. She helps her clients identify and rewire patterns in their brain that may have taken them habitually into directions they did not want to go, and to develop tremendous capacity and effectiveness to go in directions they do want to go. Her ultimate goal is for her clients to live happier, more meaningful lives. So this is a great topic, and you know, all of us are under a lot of stress right now due to the pandemic on top of normal stress. So Christy, we're very excited about your presentation today, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Sandy and Doreen, for having me. It's really a delight to be here. So if you didn't gather, I like to talk about the brain a lot. So we are going to talk about the neuroscience of stress today. It will lead to ways of coping with the stress, which, as was indicated, is tremendous during this time. I will disclaim that I am not a neuroscientist, but I do live with one. And so as I've been learning and growing my knowledge in this area, I'm always checking my science with him to see if it's valid in real science. So you can feel reassured that there is a neuroscientist sort of stamping his approval on everything that we are going to talk about today. I found for myself during the pandemic that in the early days, I just didn't understand what was happening in my body and in my mind. I sort of felt like I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't making good decisions. I was being very judgmental, and I didn't understand why. And as I started learning more about the neuroscience of what's actually happening in my brain, it gave me a sense of ease and understanding, and it gave me an idea that I could manage this in different ways. And as I've talked to over 100 people in my coaching practice over the last 8 months, I've noticed that stress is just underlying everything that's happening. It's showing up in different ways. It's showing up in personal lives and in professional lives. But when you get to the bottom of it, a lot of it is that we just don't have the capacity to handle what's going on in a way that allows us to go to some higher level functioning in our brain and make really good decisions. So we're going to talk a little bit today. It's going to be a little bit sciencey. We're going to talk about the role of the brain, the parts of the brain, and then the keys to a healthy brain and what you're able to do. So in the Q&A, if you are able to, I would love to know who here has experienced stress in the last 8 months. Go ahead and enter it in the Q&A, and let's get an idea of, you know, what kind of an audience we are dealing with. Yeah, I have somebody who also raised their hand. You know, rather than the Q&A, that's fine as well. Yeah, a lot of us are. Thank you. And now I'd be curious if you could enter into the Q&A, what has been causing this stress for you? You know, is it the pandemic? Is it concerns about the state of the world, your kids, your remote school environment? What is it that's causing this stress? COVID, yeah. The election, COVID, work, and it's just all kind of piling on each other right now, isn't it? Yeah. So you just heard me take a deep breath. So I'm going to ask you to do the same as we transition into the learning part. If everybody could just pause and take a deep breath from the top of your head down to the tips of your toes. And let's move on then to the next slide and talk about what is going on that is causing this reaction. So our brain, the main job of our brain is to protect us and take care of us, which means it is constantly searching the environment, is looking for what is currently going wrong and what might be going on. And its job is to prepare us for all of that. So what we are experiencing right now is a neurotypical reaction to stress. Our brains are doing their job. They are trying to protect us, and they are just overwhelmed. And they're overwhelmed with hormones, which do not allow us to access our prefrontal cortex. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But a number I'd like you to be aware of is after 7 to 10 days of stress, our brain goes into survival mode. And March 13th is the day I consider the first day of the pandemic, because that was the day that everybody I knew was sent home from work and was asked to start working remotely from that point on. Well, believe it or not, that was 248 days ago. Several multitudes of 7 to 10 days of stress. You can only imagine what is happening in our brains right now. So we're going to look at it a little bit more closely. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to take you back to your, high school biology class, perhaps a bit here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the parts of the brain so you understand what's going on. The first phrase that I want you to be aware of is a phrase called the body budget. This comes from Lisa Feldman Barrett at Northeastern University, and basically there are regions of our brain whose main job is to keep us alive. And every time our brain moves any part of our body, inside or out, it spends some of that budget. We replenish that budget by eating, drinking, and sleeping. But to make sure that we stay in balance, our brain is constantly searching and figuring out what can I use where and what's coming up that will help replenish it. If we are unbalanced for a long time, we experience chronic stress. And the interesting thing is by just imagining what might happen to you, whether it becomes an emotion or an action, it impacts your body budget. And I'm wondering, how many of you are doing what I'm doing sometimes, which is imagining sometimes the worst of what might be coming up. And that's impacting my brain's ability to manage my body budget. The next part I want to talk about to give you some more context is the prefrontal cortex. So this is the part of the brain that's right here behind your forehead. And this is the part of the brain that's involved in all of our higher level functioning, our goal direction, delaying gratification, making and retrieving memories, decision-making, empathy. And this is the part of the brain that we lose the ability to access during stress. The reason why is because of the next two terms on the screen, dopamine and norepinephrine. So these are among the two classes of stress hormones that are secreted to respond to stress. And we're going to talk a little bit more about them on the next slide, but I just want you to be aware of those two words. Dopamine might be more familiar to you. Norepinephrine is basically adrenaline in the brain. And the last term on this slide to be aware of is neuroplasticity. So this is the capacity of the brain to change throughout life. This is how we develop new habits or behaviors by developing new neural pathways. And this is actually what we do in coaching. So what I do in coaching is help people become aware of neural pathways that aren't really serving them anymore and help them develop new ones. Well, it's really hard to develop new neural pathways when our brains are not functioning at that very high level. And so that's why the first thing we need to do is deal with the stress in people's lives before we can start to manage behavior change or even goal direction and higher aspiration. So if we can go to the next slide. What's really fun about this presentation is there are so many amazing women in science I get to highlight today. I talked about Lisa Feldman Barrett. This slide actually comes from Amy Arnsten. She's a professor of neurobiology at Yale Medical School. And she studies the hormones that affect the prefrontal cortex. We mentioned dopamine and norepinephrine. And she calls the prefrontal cortex the Goldilocks of the brain, because that part of our brain functions really, really well when everything is just right. So if you remember the story of Goldilocks and the three bears, you know, she goes into the house and she tries to sleep in their bed and eat their oatmeal, and one is too hot or too hard, one is too cold or too soft, and then one is just right. Well, the prefrontal cortex is Goldilocks. It wants things to be just right. So for the prefrontal cortex to operate well, we need to have just the right levels of these two neurochemicals to allow neurons to communicate. When we don't have enough, we are on one side of that spectrum. We maybe have too little stress and too little stimulation. If we have too much, we're on the other side. Too much stress, too much stimulation. The ideal state is being in the middle. So being alert and interested, but not overwhelmed. What's interesting to me, and I was fascinated to learn, was whether we are overstressed or understressed, we have similar functioning. So at the bottom of the slide in the red, you can see the things you might experience if you are over or under stressed are things like foggy thinking, poor impulse control, poor decision-making, lack of empathy, and very black and white thinking. You know, so this might explain reaching for that, you know, tub of ice cream at night and when you're feeling stressed, or going for the comfort food. Mine is pasta and a glass of wine. So let me give you an example, because this is very individual. Let me give you an example of how I've experienced that during the pandemic. I have two stepkids, so they're with me part of the time and with their father, and then they're with their mother the other part of the time. And at one point in the pandemic, I was sort of becoming aware that maybe we had different expectations in our homes for how we wanted to behave during the pandemic. And instead of being very thoughtful and curious about, oh, how could we have a conversation and set expectations, I jumped immediately to, oh, I will be living on the third floor of the house where I will have no interaction with anybody at all. Kind of some black and white thinking going on there, right? And probably underlying some judgment about what I think is going on and not being curious to act. And so I'm curious again, if we can go back to the Q&A, where are you right now? Do you feel like you're in the too little or the too much side of stress? And you can go ahead and enter that into the Q&A. Yeah, I think most people are saying, you know, gosh, I feel like I'm in too much stress. There's actually a little bit of the too little that we're experiencing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But yep, everyone right now is saying too much, too much, too much. But one person brings up a really great point. It does ebb and flow. This is not a constant state. So you may notice times where you are feeling just right. You're keyed in, you're really alert, and then something might happen, like you learn that your stepkids might not be following protocols you would want them to be following, and you slide right into too much stress. The other thing I'm noticing is that people are sitting a little bit in too little stress because every day is exactly the same as the day before and the day after. There's not a lot of change and variety in our lives, and that's actually having too little stress or stimulation and affecting our brains. So for those of you who are feeling too much or too little, I'm curious, what have you noticed about yourself during this time that's just not typical? What behaviors or actions are you exhibiting that you're like, that's not who I am? Again, this could be memory issues, foggy thinking, things just taking more effort. Very fatigued. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's our brains overloaded, just trying to do so much. It's our body budget, right? Our body budget's saying, I don't have the capacity to take care of you. You need to go to sleep and refresh. Analysis paralysis, foggy thinking. Yeah, yeah. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of with all the people I'm talking to. It's all very consistent. So what can we do? There is good news here. Let's move on to the next slide and talk about the 5 keys to a healthy brain. So these keys are necessary to the process of making new neural connections and to maintaining a healthy body budget. The more one or a few of these is compromised, the harder it is for the brain to stay flexible, healthy, and cognitively sharp, especially through stress. The first 3 in particular will provide a foundation for the body budget, and we mentioned that a little bit before. So we can go to the next slide. I will note the star of the show is going to be my dog, Gibson. You will see him in many of these pictures because he is the most photogenic of our family. So what we know about brain health and exercise is that a minimum of 3 minutes, 3 times a week of exercise is generally recommended. Those shorter workouts of more intensity and longer with less are helpful as well. And this is not necessarily to take over things you might be doing for heart health or other things. This is just for brain health, 3 times a week, 30 minutes each. And when we exercise, we actually kick off a transmitter called brain-derived neurotropic factor, which allows our neural connections to connect more readily and easily. So when you do regular exercise, you actually get smarter. So if there's a good reason to exercise, I think that's one of them. But it also improves blood flow and increases oxygen levels, which increases neuron growth. And so remember, we talked about if you're trying to change a habit or a behavior or working towards a goal, it's really hard to do that unless you're creating an environment where neuron growth can occur and these neural pathways can be formed. So 30 minutes of exercise 3 times a week is a great step. If you can go to the next slide, please. This slide makes me laugh because I wrote a healthy adult needs between 7 to 9 hours of sleep. If any of you have dogs, I think they get way more than that. And I don't know what's actually needed for them, but gosh, doesn't he look snuggly and cute? So we're going to keep him up there. But it's true, we do need between 7 to 9 hours of sleep. The reasoning is when we sleep, our brain waves go into a state where cerebral spinal fluid gets pumped up into the brain. So I have this cute little brain here. And so if you imagine the spine is down here, you know, this fluid is being pumped up into the brain and it cleans out all the junk you don't need, which makes way for us to create new neural connections. And again, these are key to creating behavior changes in our life. The other thing that happens when we have a lack of sleep in particular is often a lack of impulse control and poor decisions. So again, how many times have you woken up in the morning and been like, gosh, I really should go for a run or a walk, but I'm so sleepy, and gone back to sleep? You know, your body needs that sleep. It's important. And it also can get in the way of doing other things. I'm curious because I'm hearing from people a lot that their sleep is really impaired right now. How are you all doing? How many of you are noticing a change in your sleep? You know, we have one participant who says she's very fatigued. She also is newly pregnant. So there's a lot of stuff going on with her for sure. Someone else saying they're sleeping far less than they used to. Yeah. I mean, it's not uncommon for me to wake up in the middle of the night and have a hard time getting back to sleep because my brain just starts spinning. And we'll talk about a way to manage that in just a moment. Let's go to the next slide. So nutrition, again, one of the 3 factors to help maintain a good body budget. Interestingly, our brain, while it only occupies 2% of our entire body, it uses 20% of what we ingest. And so we know that we need good whole food to help us create these new neural pathways. And we also know that we need to stay away from foods and substances that inhibit this neural growth or create inflammation. And some research is showing that this includes things like aspartame and other artificial sweeteners, high fructose corn syrup, alcohol, vegetable oils, and grains. So if you look at my lunch the other day of wedding soup, it's doing okay, right? There's some grains in there for sure with the pasta, but you know, some good vegetables and homemade. So that's always better than canned. Can we go to the next slide, please? So novelty. In my opinion, and from all the people I've talked about, this is the one thing that is missing the most in our life right now, is novelty. As I said before, every day looks the same as the day before and the day after. It's very hard to create new, fun, stimulating activities when we're stuck at home, right? And we need to stay home. That's the right thing to do. How can we create new experiences? Because what we know is these experiences stimulate neuronal connections and potential for learning, and they increase the level of dopamine. So if you remember the Goldilocks curve, you know, that too little stress is too little dopamine. So if you want to get back into that just right, how can you increase that level of dopamine a bit? You know, so it's fun, it's play, it's trying new things. You know, for me during the pandemic, it's every weekend wondering which restaurant are we going to order from tonight so we can support the local businesses, and I get to try something different than what I've had otherwise. And I look forward to it all week long. Like I start planning for it, you know, about this time of the week, and then start talking about it. And that creates some dopamine in my brain. You know, playing with my dog. We have this beautiful maple tree in our backyard, and the leaves all fell, and running around with him in the backyard, you know, was just play and just fun. It was time spent without a purpose. That's all play is. And that can be anything from, like I said, playing with your dog, doing a crossword puzzle, whatever it might be. And so I'm curious for you all, how are you finding joy and fun during this pandemic? If you can enter into the Q&A. I signed up for a flower subscription from an independent floral shop. And so every week I got dahlias, and it was just like created something new in my environment that I wasn't expecting. And so again, something different to look at. So it wasn't just the same four walls. Walking my dog, spending time with my wife. Yeah. Yeah, new furniture, my gosh, right? I mean, we don't need to buy new clothes. We're not going anywhere, but we can buy, you know, I bought a beautiful day bed that I'm really enjoying, right? Throw pillows, something to just create some enjoyment. Thank you. We can go to the next slide then. Mindfulness. So this is the most effective solution to stress. And before we all joined together in this webinar, Doreen and I were talking about this, about how it is an easy thing to do, but it is so hard to remember. It's so hard to remember when you're running from one thing to the next and your mind is going 100 miles an hour to just stop and take a deep breath. Just taking a deep breath is huge. It really creates homeostasis in the body. It aids us in disengaging from whatever these distracting thoughts or sensations are, and it invokes a relaxation response. It slows our heartbeat, and it lowers or it stabilizes blood pressure. This is what I do in the middle of the night when I wake up and my mind is spinning, is I lay in bed and I just take a few deep breaths and see if that can relax me enough to get back to sleep. And I think the key here is that mindfulness can be that simple. It can be that simple as a deep breath. It can be the close paying of attention. And people think this means, oh, I need to go sit in a dark room on a pillow for 30 minutes and meditate without, you know, talking to anybody. And what I want to reassure people is that's not necessarily true. That really the close paying of attention of any kind increases neurotransmitters responsible for creating new neural connections and provides you that relaxation response you're looking for. So this could be meditation. This could be some kind of a study. My partner is a bit of a coffee snob. So every morning he makes coffee and he has to grind the beans and he weighs it and he does this whole long thing. And I didn't totally understand it for a while. And then I got it. That's his mindfulness practice in the morning. That's what he does every day. That's his close paying of attention that helps him start his day more clearly. You know, coaching, therapy, prayer, those are all also things that offer space for that close paying of attention. So before we go on, let's take another deep breath. Let's actually take 3 deep breaths. So just pause and notice. Do you feel different in your body? How do you feel in your mind? How can you remember, if nothing else, that you take away from this presentation? To just breathe. Maybe it's a post-it on your computer, it's an alarm on your phone, you know, building it as a habit so that, you know, one thing I've been doing is when I transition from one activity to the other a day, I stop and I take 3 breaths before I start the next thing. So how can you build that in? So if we can go to the next slide, please. So how are you managing your stress? If you go to my website, you'll find a quiz with those 5 keys on it. It's a self-assessment. You can look at, you know, how do you think you're doing and how would you like to be going? And so I welcome you to try that out. I would also love to hear from you in the moment. Of those 5 keys that we talked about, which one do you think is the one that you need to put some focus on to help you? If you could enter that into the Q&A. I know for me, it's been mindfulness because I feel like that sort of underlies everything. It helps me not reach for that cookie when I want to reach for the cookie if I stop and take a breath. But what is it for you? Exercise, nutrition, sleep, novelty or fun, or mindfulness? You know, about 50% of the people that I'm talking to these days, it is mindfulness, and sleep is a very close second. In this group, it looks like we have nutrition and mindfulness as areas that are coming up. The other thing I'd like to offer you is anybody who's attending this or viewing this, I'd love to offer you a free 30-minute stress management coaching session. It's a sequence of questions that I utilize when I'm talking with people who are in stress. So I invite you to bring me a stressful situation that you're dealing with. And it helps to essentially get that prefrontal cortex online and help you develop that higher level thinking so you can get more clear about your next step. It's the sequence of questions that I'm using myself. When I find myself getting overloaded, I'll go sit in a corner and start just going through the questions on my own. And I'd love to offer that to the group. If you're interested, you can go to my website. You can contact me through there and just mention the Point Park WIN program so I know where you came from. And then we can schedule time for you to join me in talking about your stress. So if we can go to the next slide, please. One more amazing female scientist for us to focus on is Susan David. She wrote an amazing book called Emotional Agility. I highly recommend it. She's a Harvard psychologist and a co-founder of the Institute of Coaching. And this is a quote from her that I think is really relevant. Avoiding stress is impossible, but what we can do is adjust our relationship to stress. It doesn't have to own us. We can own it. And so my hope for all of you is that you can find that ability to own your stress, to empower yourself to manage and support it during such a stressful time in our world's history. Hopefully that can help you get through the next few months, which, you know, who knows what's going to happen, and build some great skills continuing on. So thank you for your time today. And I'd love to answer any questions if there are any.
Thanks so much, Christy. And for any of you who are in the live audience now, please type questions into the Q&A box, and we'll make sure we get those to Christy. One question that had come up, Christy, is how do you learn to recognize your own stress response? And what are some strategies that you might recommend in terms of coping strategies?
Great question. So the first part of that is, how do you learn to recognize your own stress response? It's really through awareness, right? It's becoming more mindful about what you're doing in the moment. I find the easiest way for me to do that is to be talking with somebody else who can reflect back to me what they're noticing or observing. Coaching is really helpful in that. With my clients, a lot of what I'll do is have them sort of reenact a situation that they think, I think something went right on that one. Let's reenact it, and then let's see what we can learn and start to notice patterns and trends that are maybe indicating a stress response, and then learn how we might manage them differently. And, you know, it's highly individual, Doreen. So I think in the moment, the best thing somebody can do if they are aware of a stress response really is taking that breath, counting to 7 before they say or do anything, is just the best thing we can do. We're trying to just slow down that time, right, between the stimulus and the reaction in our brain. Because if we don't, we just do what we always do. We go down that really quick neural pathway that's been formed and created for decades. Well, we want to change that. So we need to slow down time and then make a different choice. And that really is what we do in coaching, is helping people do that.
Now, if it's a stress response that we're recognizing in someone else, are there some recommendations you would have for how we might address that when we see that with another person?
Oh gosh, great question. Well, it may depend on who the person is and your relationship with them. There might be some people you don't want to address. If it were me, I think I would again pause and be curious. You know, gosh, that seemed out of character. What's going on with you right now? Is there something happening? You know, I've done that with colleagues of mine a lot recently, because a lot of behavior has not been in character. And so just, again, creating that awareness, but kind of stopping them in the moment.
Thank you. Because I think that is something, you know, whether it's in the workplace or even with our family or friends, you know, sometimes, as you mentioned before, it's hard for us to recognize our own stress response, but sometimes we can see that stress response in others, you know, and it's important for us to think about how we can be helpful rather than causing additional stress, I guess, related to their responses. Now, we did get another question that came in. My daughter, you might hear my daughter, she is actually finishing a class right now, right across from me. And
Doreen, really quickly, before we go to the other questions, I also want to just point out too that, you know, we might be having our own stress response as a result of someone else's stress response, right? So somebody else might be doing something out of character, and then we might move into really judgmental actions. You know, that is a stress response. I will be very honest, I've been doing it a lot lately. I watch a video and I'm like, oh, they're not wearing masks. I get so frustrated. Because I've just so quickly moved into that because I'm stressed. So it is sort of multi-layered in many ways. And I would also then suggest is that we notice, like, what's bothering us about other people, and watching for that pattern as well, because odds are pretty good. If something's bothering us about someone else, it's probably indicative of how we act, even though we might not want to admit it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I know one of the things that I've been trying to do is to recognize my own judgment when I get into those moments of judgment, and recognizing that, you know, I can control my response. While I can't control another's behavior, I control my response to that behavior.
Yeah, and that's actually the second question in the stress management sequence that I do is, what can you control and what can't you control? What could you try differently? So Doreen, you're already like 2 steps ahead.
All right. Well, our next question is about is about stress response as well. I notice myself getting stressed when I can't follow my daily routine during the week. Is there anything that I can do to help relieve this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my first thought of that is you have the awareness, which is great. What I would love to know is what's getting in the way. And if this was my client, I'd be asking them to start tracking what is getting in the way of following your daily routine. Is it thoughts? Is it behaviors and actions? And let's start to notice the trends in that and then figure out how we want to address it. The other thing I would suggest, and I know I sound like a broken record, is stop and take a breath and just pause and see, like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing this. Every Wednesday I do yoga. Why am I not going to yoga? Just pause on that for a second and think about it. Yeah. The other thing I would just comment on this is, I don't think this is this question, but I've noticed it a lot from people I've been talking to, is because every day is the same, because we're all working from home, they're having a hard time maintaining routines they had pre-pandemic. You know, going to the gym, eating healthy, other things, because they're out of routine. Again, you know, creating a new habit or new behavior is possible, but it's not possible until we can reduce some of that stress so we can get those new neural pathways working. So that's the first place I would start, is reducing that stress, trying to use those 5 keys, and then trying to develop those new neural pathways into the new habits.
Well, you mentioned mindfulness.
Yeah.
As one of those keys. And you mentioned, you know, sometimes we set up these routines to help us in terms of, we may not recognize them as mindful practice, but they ultimately are mindful activities for us. Are there some other recommendations of mindful practices that someone might build into their daily lives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So I would say, walking or running, you know, I mean, we can still go for walks outside. The challenge is when you're walking is not just, you know, marching down the street and moving on to the next destination, but it's pausing, you know, and stopping and looking, oh, look at the trees, they're losing their leaves, or look at that yard sign in that person's yard. So it's being more aware of your surroundings. You know, the other things are, when you're doing something, know you're doing it. So when you're brushing your teeth, instead of thinking about what you're going to wear, you know, that day, or if you're going to be able to get a good night's sleep, just be aware of the feeling of the toothbrush on your mouth, you know, on your teeth. Washing dishes, the same thing. You know, you're washing dishes, be aware of that water coming over you. So it's just really bringing that awareness into every day. The other thing I will say I've been doing lately is, in my car, instead of sitting at a stoplight, picking up my phone to see what I might have missed, I take deep breaths. Again, broken record, but it's a great time, a minute of just sitting and taking some deep breaths while you're waiting for that light to change.
Yeah, being present in the moment and
Exactly.
recognizing that present moment. Yeah, one of the things that I found that I really enjoy is grass cutting. And actually got a traditional rotary mower and do I basically consider that a mindful practice, a moving meditation as I'm cutting the grass, and just allow myself to experience it. And it's been a really helpful piece, especially when I'm stressed. Does the grass need cut? All right, let me go do that.
Well, and it's such a beautiful meditation, right? Because you also have that really satisfying sound, you know, right, of it turning and of it cutting the grass. It's such a multi-sensory activity, and it probably qualifies for exercise because you still got to like do some effort to get that thing going.
Oh, absolutely.
Really
Yeah.
Yeah. Doreen, I'm curious if you don't mind me asking you, because you mentioned before you've been bringing mindfulness more into your life. What else have you been doing that you're finding useful?
Well, I am trying to keep a regular meditation practice, and I'm trying to be kind to myself and generous to myself. And if it isn't a full 30 minutes, that it's okay, even if I take a 5-minute break. And sometimes for me, I do a lot of breath meditations. I find that that's helpful. I didn't recognize how shallowly I often breathe if I don't consciously think about breath. So that's been something that's been helpful. And another thing is time in nature, spending time outside as much as possible. So, trying to make the best of the COVID stay-at-home orders, I found that I was doing a lot of my work on our deck. And we have, trees behind us and a lot of birds. I added some bird feeders so I could enjoy the sound of the chirping. And spending that time outside, I think really helped for me personally in dealing with the being at home, because I didn't feel like I was stuck at home.
Yeah.
Being able to be outside was definitely a very helpful piece for me.
That's really lovely. It makes me think too about the breath. When we're stressed, what happens to our body? Again, our brain has moved into protective mode. And so we literally start to turn inward, physically. If you can see, my shoulders are rolling in, my chest is kind of caved. That's a stress response. Well, it's impossible to take a deep breath when you're in this state. You can't fill up your lungs. And so we are, breathing really shallowly when we're like this, or we're hunched over our computers. So it's just opening up that, and taking that deep breath and stretching out those muscles is so freeing.
Yeah, really, really helpful. And another thing that I did over the summer, and knowing that I'd have more time at home, was I worked on getting yoga teacher training certification.
Oh, fun.
Start to bring the physical and the mental practice together. Yeah, and it really was. It was really enjoyable, a challenge, but also really enjoyable.
That's really lovely. I like that. And it's sort of also, again, it's a novelty, right? I mean, it's something you were interested in, but it was something different for you to focus on, was doing what you had to do to get that certification. And so bringing something different into your life. Doreen, your brain must be very healthy. I'm just counting all the keys.
Well, and that's, would definitely, but it's a very intentional process, isn't it, Christy? We have to be intentional about moving forward in this way for ourselves.
We absolutely have to be intentional, and we have to be even more intentional now because it is such a weird state of the world that we're living in. Everything is so much more intentional. Otherwise, you're just sort of, again, living the same day you've been living. It's Groundhog Day. And that can be really challenging for people sometimes when they are really tired or overstressed or fatigued. It's like, oh, I have to do something else really hard. But it will make a difference, as you've noticed, right? Being intentional will pay off in the end. It really will.
Mm-hmm. Well, we did get another question, and so I'd like to share that with you. How has your approach to stress management changed as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I talk about it a lot, but you can only imagine my friends and family are getting really tired of it. For me, it's being more, it's exactly what Doreen and I just talked about. It's being more intentional. It really is noticing the things I need to do and being more overt about scheduling them into my day. So it's the daily walk with the dog. That's not just outside and inside, but it's down around the street and back. It's the taking the breaths between activities. For me, I'm like a rock star sleeper. Like if there was an Olympics of sleep, I would be a gold medalist many times over, but my sleep has been really impacted. And so just becoming aware of, well, what might be contributing to this, and how do I make better decisions? Do I need that glass of wine at dinner, or is that going to impact my sleep later? So I think the answer to the question is all those things, but the general theme is really awareness. Like I'm just so much more aware of what I need to be doing, and knowing when I'm not doing it, how it might impact me and why. And then I think in the moment, catching myself. I'll be honest, my partner and I had a little disagreement last night because I was panicking about the case numbers that have been going up. And again, about, kids coming back and forth between houses, and what are we going to do? And what does that look like? And I, in the moment, was like, oh, here I go. I'm in a stress moment. And I stopped, took a deep breath, and I was like, okay, let me calm down for a second. And then let's try this conversation again when I can get my head clear. So I would also that makes me think about how sleep is important, and we do need deep sleep through the night to have those fluids flush through our brain. But just even the idea of rest in some way, taking a break in some way, those breaths we talked about, me last night saying, hold on, I need to take a break. Let me come back in 2 minutes when I can think more clearly. It's going into the nature, like you said, Doreen. It's just taking that break is another important part of that healthy brain that we've talked about.
You know, it's just amazing sometimes how once a stress response begins to emerge, we escalate it so quickly within ourselves, don't we?
Again, for good reason. It's what we should be doing in some ways. It's what our brain should be doing. It thinks it's protecting us. It thinks it's telling us, get out, go away, fight. But we're not dealing with bears and dinosaurs anymore, you know? I mean, and so we need to adapt. And so you're right. It is easy for it to just roll downhill really quickly. And we need to just become aware, stop, and okay, let's try that again, you know?
Now, I want to make sure I bring Sandy in because she has great expertise on the human resources side. And one of the questions that came up was, you know, knowing that this is the environment in which we're living and working now, are there particular strategies at the organizational level that might be helpful when you have a group of, you know, when you know your employees are particularly stressed, not just with their, you know, their work, but with their life outside of work? Are there things that employers or organizations can do to help to address this?
Sure. And is that question for me or for Sandy?
For you, but I think we'll tie Sandy in because she has the HR expertise. And I know this is something that HR managers are really thinking about and talking about.
Yeah, I would love to hear from Sandy's perspective. You know, I've been working with clients around the world over the last 8 months in all levels of organizations. You know, some are managers, some are not, and everybody is dealing with this. And I do think the awareness, just creating the awareness of this is what's going on in the world. It's not an excuse for not performing at high levels, but it is impacting you. To me, it's huge. And if organizations can start to do that more, I think that employees will say, oh, okay, that's how I'm feeling today. I understand where I'm coming from now. And now I can adapt and do something different. But I'd love to hear from Sandy about what you're seeing or what you'd recommend at a HR level.
Oh, it is. Doreen's right. It's a big topic that, you know, every time I get with a group of HR professionals, we're talking about, you know, what do we do? What do we do to make our employees' life better? And awareness is absolutely one of the keys, which means managers need to step outside their comfort zones and be creative in order to maintain that contact with their employees. We rely so heavily on, you know, virtual meetings and emails. Maybe you need to actually pick up a phone and call someone. So we're seeing HR managers are really thinking outside the box. We need to be very creative and flexible during this time. And we need to have a lot of empathy. You know, everyone is experiencing COVID-19 in a unique personal way. So we need to understand that. And just because someone's response is different than ours, that doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just different. And so HR is actually, we're learning a lot from COVID-19 on how to be better HR professionals, better managers. One of the things I've been stressing with, you know, students and other colleagues is to look for the positive in every situation. You know, for me, and Doreen will appreciate this comment, I've become much better with using technology because of COVID-19, and that's a big step for me. So, you know, even as we were joking beforehand, you know, this session was perfect timing, but it's, you know, we're learning more. And I think that's a big takeaway, is to look at these situations we're being exposed to and find the positive, find what can I learn and take forward into the future from this situation.
Yeah. It's actually one of the questions in my stress management sequence is, you know, what is important, right? What is meaningful, right? You know, and how do you celebrate that? You know, I think what you said is, you know, you're learning some new skills. Let's celebrate that because that's amazing and that's fun. I think one thing I'm noticing when I'm talking to people is how much they're missing the organic conversations that would just happen in offices. And it goes back to that intentionality that we talked about, Doreen, that they're like, I know I need to reach out to my colleagues and like schedule a meeting, but it just feels awkward. And I think that if HR can help normalize that in some way or help facilitate meetings or gatherings for people they're meaningful, I think that's really useful because people are a bit isolated. And the other thing you said that reminded me was it is very individual. I was talking with a manager over the summer who managed a team of, I think, maybe 7 to 10 salespeople. And he was like, I don't know what to do for all of them. I want to like do something for the team. And I said, well, you know, they all need different things. Why don't you give them all phone calls and check in and see? And he was like, oh, it's amazing. You know, but again, like he's not thinking at his highest level because he's stressed. And then when he did that, he had great success because then he really knew where his team was and what they needed from him. So he was able to be a better manager. And then the other thing I would just add is that managers, HR people, everybody needs support. Again, we're all a bit isolated. Our partners, our spouses, our families, our friends are probably tired of us, you know, talking about things. You don't have to use a coach. Coaching is great, but get some support in some way, if it's through another colleague or however you want to get support, because we just can't hold it all. And especially HR during this time, they can't hold it all for everybody. They need support.
Yeah, we kind of need to build our own teams, right? And a coach can be a great person to cheer us on and to help support us. But we can have a team even beyond that, a team of support people. I know one of the things we've done at the Roland School of Business, we have several of us that have worked closely together while we're not physically in close physical proximity. We still will text each other or send a funny meme or somehow reach out. And that's something for me personally, I enjoy that so much.
Mm-hmm. And everyone's different, right? So some people really love that and some people don't, but offering that as an option to connect you, I think is really important. I have a friend who's been doing similar things with her team. You know, she had people submit their walk-up song. It's like, you know, baseball, when you're going up to bat, you have a song they usually play for you. That was my batting. I don't think that's actually baseball. I think that's lacrosse. Anyway, and then she would play it and everyone would guess whose walk-up song it was, right? And so it took maybe 10 minutes, but it was a way of reminding everybody on the team that they're individuals and humans and that they do have a connection to each other that they weren't feeling because they don't see each other as much.
And we did another thing that we did, and it wasn't a faculty meeting per se to cover any kind of content, but a casual gathering. It was basically bring your pet to work day.
Oh.
A virtual platform. And it was, one of the most memorable experiences that I've had, you know, and I feel like I got to know my colleagues even better through their pets and the discussion and interaction. And there were some colleagues without pets who came just to see everyone else's pets. And it was just a fun, enjoyable, kind of collaborative experience.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? We get to see in people's spaces in a way we don't normally get to do. I mean, you're in my office/yoga space, but unless you're a friend of mine, you would never come into the space otherwise. I actually led a workshop recently, and during the break, I had everybody go and grab something in their house and bring it back to answer a question that I asked them about some future dreams that they had. And it was so fun to see, you know, one person brought back a cookie jar and someone else brought back like a guitar. And it was just so fun, and they really energized the group. And again, it helped us connect in a different way than we normally would have through this sort of video medium.
So it sounds like, Christy, part of our coping with stress can be in really, you know, again, kind of recognizing the need for those connections and finding ways to engage, even if we can't be in physical proximity.
I mean, I think so. Look, my biggest fear about all of this is that we are all so isolated, and it's going to be potentially worse over the winter, you know, and I'm afraid coming out of it that there's going to be this just really dramatic increase of loneliness that may lead to depression and other things. And so any way we can connect with other people right now is so important and so vital to just our mood and our energy and our spirit.
I know some companies that have actually decided to not do their traditional performance appraisal this year. And instead, all the managers have just personally reached out and done a wellness check-in phone call with their employees. So, it's, performance is performance, but right now, what's more important is you. And I think the long range effect of those type of actions is really going to be positive and beneficial for the company and the employee.
I love that. I'm going to take that with me and share it with whomever I can. I agree with you. I think that is an investment in the future of your employee engagement. I mean, that's huge, so huge. Because again, what is most important right now? Like you said, productivity matters, but really what's most important, that we're safe and healthy and that we know people care about us. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really critical, especially in times when we can't be there in person for each other. We can still, be there for each other in other ways. And you mentioned earlier phone calls, that sometimes we forget that we can't pick up the phone and have this conversation because, we in some ways have this technology mediated lifestyle and that just interaction through a direct conversation is something that we've lost.
Yeah. I do most of my coaching by phone, not by video. I mean, I'll do either depending on what the client wants, but I really love phone coaching. I just think there's a deeper connection that occurs when you're like literally in someone's ear. It feels a little bit more intimate and just more personal for me, at least. And it's kind of old fashioned. We don't do phone calls really anymore, right? It's just really, for me, it's really lovely. And it doesn't all have to be through the new technology. We can use old ways of communicating. Letters, gosh, I've been writing letters to my nieces and nephews because it's fun to get mail, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. My sister and my daughter became pen pals, even though we live just, in side-by-side communities because of the pandemic and not being able to see each other in person. They actually started back and forth where they either write a note or do a coloring page or something like that, and they mail it back and forth to each other. And it's been just a really nice thing. And my sister said she thinks she enjoys it even more than my own daughter does.
I love that. Doreen, I think you could write like a whole guidebook on how to survive a pandemic. Seriously, you have some wonderful ideas.
We try to make the best of it. And I think to your point earlier, when you think about those keys, they really are necessary, but we have to consciously think about them and decide on the path that we want to take.
Right, exactly. And like I said, it's having that awareness of, it doesn't have to be like this. I don't have to be reacting like this all the time. I want to make a change. And then, figuring out how to make the change, is the key.
Well, and that's a great way to wrap up our session today. But Christy, if you have some final thoughts, we would love to be able to share them with the audience now, and then I'll turn it over to Sandy to close out today's session.
My hope for everybody is that this helped you learn how to stress less and live more. And again, I would love to, talk to you in more detail. So please feel free to check out my website, which is www.christystuber.com. And take good care, friends. Take good care.
Thanks so much, Christy. We are so grateful to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Christy, for joining us. That was, I took so many notes during your presentation, and I know I'm going to use them and I'm going to share them with many people. What's perfect is we're going to sort of expand and continue this conversation on December 2nd when we have our next Win Wednesday event, and we're going to discuss mindfulness in business practices, feel, think, act to prosper. And joining us will be Jennifer Ferris-Glick, and she will be sharing really valuable information on that with us on December 2nd. We also have some additional sort of save the date information for you. On Monday, just next Monday, a few days from now, we are having a special edition of Win Wednesday. We will be collaborating with Take the Hill, and we are having a panel discussion on the impact of COVID-19 in women. So coming together, women leading in community and workplace is going to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on women, and we have some excellent individuals joining us that day: Dr. Angela Reynolds from the YWCA, Dr. Brittany Brinkman, who's also from Point Park University, Dr. Jessica Malvahill from IUP, and then one of our senior HR students, Samantha Weber, will also be joining us to give us that sort of new perspective. Then it's sort of long range, but please keep in your calendar Friday, March 5th, next spring, we are going to do the second AWIN, Accelerating Women in Industry workshop, and it's going to focus on holistic resilience. So we're going to continue this conversation of, you know, how do we really travel this journey through COVID-19, and how do we come out on the other side a stronger individual? We are currently requesting proposals for the spring of 2021. If you have a topic or know someone that you think has a great topic to share with us, please email me at smurbosh@pointpark.edu. So again, thank you very much, Christy, for joining us. And we hope to see you again on the 2nd when we continue the conversation.